Merdita, and welcome to this third edition of International Cooking. I'm your host today, Roy Davis, and we're going to be talking jambalaya today. And jambalaya, originally from New Orleans, a New Orleans, Louisiana dish from Southern America. We are going to be experimenting with some great flavors that are going to be coming together today. And what makes jambalaya? Jambalaya is comprised of three things, okay? And you see me put up three fingers. I'm doing this one and that one there. So, three things. We need a meat, we need a rice, and we need a vegetable, okay? Now, most of the time when you are making jambalaya, traditionally in America, we like to make jambalaya with special ingredients that we can get regionally. If you were in the northern side of the United States, you might use a nice kielbasa sausage. If you were in the southern part of the country, you'd get the deepest smoked sausage that you could get your hands on today. Today, we're actually going to be using chicken, we're going to be using sausages, and we're going to be using shrimp. Now, one of the defining things that make up a jambalaya in the United States is that it is a southern dish. It originated in the Caribbean and a couple of hundred years ago, and made its way to the United States shores. And one of the great things about jambalaya is that even though it originated in the Caribbean and made it to the shores, it's spread all throughout America. And one of the greatest things about foods in America, the variety, everybody across the country found their own ways to make jambalaya. So, right now we're going to start with getting our food prepared for our dish. This is a dish that's typically made on the stove with a pot. It can be baked, but it's not traditionally baked. Today we're going to be using a pretty large pot, probably about a 4-quart pot because it's a lot of ingredients. And let's get started. The first thing we're going to do, because of cleanliness, we're going to get our gloves on here because we're going to be working with meats and fish and other things. Well, so we're going to start with our first ingredient today. Our first ingredient is going to be chicken breast. And you can use any kind of chicken you want. You can use drumsticks, you can use breasts, you can use legs, necks, whatever. But the easiest and best way to get a nice texture inside the dish is to use chicken breast. So we're going to use that today. And the first thing we're going to do is, before we even start preparing our chicken, we're going to get our pot out here. Now, we're going to cut up our chicken today. And we're going to cut up our sausages that we're going to use, and we're going to fry these in a pot. We're not really interested in cooking them thoroughly. It doesn't have to be cooked thoroughly for this recipe, but in my own little sense, I like to brown them a little bit and get them almost cooked, because once you get everything in the pot, it's going to cook really quick. It only takes about 25 or 30 minutes to cook. So, first thing we're going to do is get some oil in our pot, and what I'm going to do, let's get my stove on here, okay? And I'm just going to use about a tablespoon of olive oil. So I'm just going to do it by eye there, put a little bit in the pot, and I'm going to let that heat up. And then I'm going to find myself a nice knife here. Now the chicken breast, this is a pretty large piece of chicken breast. This here is about a 1/4 kilo. So a 1/4 kilo of chicken breast. Now, our sausages, our shrimp, and our chicken can be misproportionate. It doesn't have to be exactly the same proportions. If you want to use a little bit more chicken, you use a little bit more chicken. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to cut off some of these rough edges of the chicken, okay? Just a couple of, we don't want any fat. We want it to be as lean and nice as possible, okay? So I'm just going to go here and I'm just going to kind of shave off a little bit of these bad edges. Put a little slit here in my chicken and take off those edges, okay? We'll discard that. And what I like to do, when you use the chicken, you can make it chunky or you can make it thin. Myself, I like to make it a little bit thin, so I'm going to cut my chicken here so that I kind of thin it down, so that that big, large chicken breast, I'm going to make it 2 pieces. So another thing that's really nice and fun about this recipe is that it doesn't have to be precise. If you go to a fine restaurant they might like to make it pretty, but when you're cooking it at home, doesn't matter. Just cook it up good. So we're gonna cut some chicken here, okay? Now you can see the pieces, they're about maybe 3 centimeters large, okay? That's about a nice size. You don't want them too small because you want to be able to taste the chunky texture of the chicken, okay? And what I'm gonna do, now I slice these in half, and since this bottom piece was a little wide, I'm actually gonna cut it like this in half, and I'm just going to go against the grain. Okay, if you go against the grain, you're going to get a little bit tender chicken. Be careful using your knife here because you don't want to cut yourself. Now, I can already smell my oil heating up over here. And I can see that it's, ooh, I actually dropped a piece in there. It's actually starting to get really nice and hot. So what I'm going to do is finish cutting up my chicken, and I'm going to get it in to let it start browning. Now, this is just the first step. If you really don't have a lot of time to do this, to brown it like we're going to do here. Okay, I'm going to get all this in there. Okay. If you don't have time to do this, you can mix it all together in the pot, and I'll show you at the point where you can do that. But right now, what we really want to do, and this is kind of my staple and my little spin on it, is that I like to fry it up first a little bit, just to brown it. Okay. Now, the next thing we're going to do, since we've got this browning up here, we're going to take our sausage. Now, we bought this sausage locally here. We actually picked this up at Conad, but you can use any kind of sausage. Now, it's a little hard to find smoked sausage, deep smoked sausage in Albania. These type of sausages, or any other kind of sausage, will do. Now, the sausages, because you'll see that I used, like I said, I used about a quarter kilo of chicken, and this amount of sausages is about a quarter kilo of sausages. So we're going to take our sausages, and we're going to take each one, and we're going to slice it lengthwise, just like this. Okay? So what you want to do is you want to have a little bit of a sliver, so it looks like it's a sliver. Okay? And what that does is that also adds texture. Now I'm going to kind of do these 2 or 3 at a time here. It adds a texture to your chicken. Now I'm doing different sizes here. They don't have to be exactly the same size, because in the end the flavors are going to all be in one place. Now I'm just going to take my chicken here and give it a little bit of a swirl. Okay. Go back to my sausages here. Now what we're going to do to speed this process up, I'm going to show you. Now I typically do this in 2 steps. I will brown my chicken and then I'll brown my sausage. But just for time's sake, because you don't want to spend all day behind the counter, just for time's sake, I'm going to take my sausage and I'm going to put it in with my chicken and brown them both at the same time. Okay? Now at this point, our dish jambalaya is going to be so flavorful, you don't need to salt, you don't need to pepper any of this at this time. You can if you like, if you want to pepper it up. Okay? And actually I'm going to get a little bit more sausage in there. Okay. Now, there we go. Now this is about 1/8 of a kilo, and I'm kind of making the proportion of the chicken to the sausage actually the same. So I'm actually going to put 2 pieces of sausages back here. We'll do something with that later. So we're going to, you can see that our chicken is starting to brown, okay? And with the flavor, I can tell you, the flavor of that sausage, it's really going to soak up into that chicken. And this is smelling really good already, and we haven't even gotten to the jambalaya mix yet. Now, it might seem a little unusual to mix chicken and sausage together. Well, it's not just going to be chicken and sausage. It's going to be chicken, sausage, and shrimp. Now, in Louisiana, the typical jambalaya is made with sausage, shrimp, and another type of meat. You can use any kind of meat. You can use venison, deer, turkey, chicken, beef. Beef is not the most common, but venison is in the deep southern South of America because deer meat is available all over. So the meats that you want to choose, the one thing that's most important is you want to make sure that it is actually fresh. You don't want to use meats that aren't fresh, especially your sausages. So we're going to let that finish cooking there. Now, even though we've started seeing our chicken is starting to brown, okay, getting a nice brown color on it, I'm actually going to make it a little darker than that. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to get our pot ready because we're going to make our mix. Now, our mix is going to consist of a few spices here. Today, the spices that we're going to be using is we're going to use some dried shivered onions, okay? Now you can use fresh onions in this, but the dried shivered onions, they're very robust in flavor, a little bit easier to work with. You don't have to spend time chopping onions. The next thing we're going to have is we're going to add a bay leaf, a very fresh bay leaf to our dish, and then we're going to add here some cumin. I'm not exactly sure the name of cumin in Albanian, but I'm going to be using cumin seeds. Now you can use ground cumin, but I like the cumin seeds because I actually like the flavor, and it actually mixes in good with the chicken and the sausage and the shrimp. Now I'm just going to take a quick look here at our chicken and sausage, just to turn it. It's almost ready. Okay. So, and the next seasoning that we're going to be using is thyme. It's very easy to find. This is all seasonings you can find here in the store. One seasoning that I actually brought from America with me, because I came with a lot of seasonings, is ground mustard. Now, you can find it in Albania, but it's not the easiest thing to find. If you go looking, you might find it in a specialty shop. So there are a few stores here, like Naranzi, that actually carry it. Besides going locally and going store to store, you're just going to have to go look for this to see if you can find it. Now, mustard is actually a key ingredient in this, especially in my own recipe, because what the mustard and the cumin do is they give it that Creole flavor, and the Creole flavor is a Louisiana flavor. And then we're going to use a little bit of salt and black pepper, and then the last seasoning we're going to use. The typical jambalaya is very hot. Now, I understand that Albanian taste buds aren't quite as in tune with the hot foods the way we are in America. So we're going to cut down on the hotness of it to make it a little bit more comfortable for the Albanian palate. This here is called Chili Explosion. It's a mixture of different chilies and peppers, and it is a pretty hot mixture. Now, I'm only going to use a tiny bit of this just to give it a little bit of spicy flavor. We're not going to make it too hot. We're just going to make it spicy. So, what we're going to do, we're going to take, I'm going to use a spoon here for this. Now, this here is a table-sized spoon, and I'm actually going to start with my ground mustard, and I'm going to use about a tablespoon of ground mustard. Take a second here and check our stuff. We don't want our chicken and sausage to burn. Okay, that's looking good. So, we started with our mustard. Now we're going to go to the cumin seed. I'm going to use about 1/4 of that tablespoon of cumin seed. Next ingredient we're going to go to is we're going to go to the thyme, which I believe is pronounced Timo. Timo? Anybody in the studio help me there? Timo? I'm not sure there. Okay, so we're going to use about a 1/4 tablespoon of thyme. Now, I'm going to pour this into right here into the spoon here so that you see that this is about a whole tablespoon of shivered onion. We're going to use a whole tablespoon of shivered onion. Okay? We're going to use a pinch of salt, just a pinch, okay? We'll add a little bit more salt later. And we're going to use some ground pepper. Now, in my recipe, I like to use a lot of ground pepper. But we're going to cut it down a little bit today because we don't want it too hot. So I'm going to use approximately 1/8 of a tablespoon, or actually, I'm sorry, 1/8 of a teaspoon of black pepper. And the hot secret ingredient, we're just going to put a dab. We're not going to overdo it today. So we're just going to put a little bit of hot spice. That's about it. Okay, now that we've got our seasonings together, okay, I'm going to take another fork here. I'm just going to mix them up a little bit, because what we're going to do is we're going to take these seasonings and we're going to mix them with our rice. Okay, now we'll let that sit there for a moment while we check on our chicken and sausage here. Now, we're just about there. Now you can see that our chicken is nice, lightly brown, some pieces a little bit crusty, goldy on top. And what we want to do is the oil that's in the pan, we're going to use it in our mixture. So we're going to take our oil, chicken, and sausage, and we're going to dump it right into our pot. Okay, make sure all that oil gets in there because we need a little bit of oil in the bottom of the pot to keep this from sticking in the pot. Okay, let's move this over here, out of the way. Okay, now we got our chicken and sausage in the pot. We've got our dried seasonings mixed up here. Okay, and the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our canned tomatoes. We're going to use 1 whole can, okay, of tomatoes. Diced tomatoes. Actually, I think they are diced. Yes. Whole can of diced tomatoes. Inside the juice. Do not drain the juice. Okay, so we're going to get our tomatoes here, and we're going to pour them right over the top of our chicken and our sausage there, okay? Now, little secret. Not to dirty dishes. We all hate doing dirty dishes, and I'm definitely someone who hates doing dirty dishes. We're going to use the same can to measure out some tomato sauce. So, any old tomato sauce is good. Try to stay away from basilico or any flavored tomato sauce. You want pure tomato sauce, just tomatoes, okay? So we're going to take our can, and I'm going to pour it about half full, okay? So we're about half full there. And I'm going to take that tomato juice, tomato sauce, and pour it over top of my mixture. Okay? There we go. Love this tomato sauce from Conad. Okay, our next ingredient, which we're going to add. Now, you see that I mixed this together, okay? The next ingredient that we're going to use is beef bouillon. And we actually also picked this up at Conad. It's by the company Knorr, and it's a very good, very, very good quality beef bouillon. We're going to add 2 cups of water to our mixture before we add our dry seasonings, okay? And I'm going to kind of measure it out here. Measuring cup, just a plain old cup. Let's make it easy. So that there's about a cup, about 8 ounces, a cup of water. We're going to say 1. And we're going to say maybe 2. Okay. Now, we're going to add a little bit more water later, so we're going to keep that handy. Now, interesting thing about this mixture, the jambalaya. Now, I haven't turned my pot on yet because I'm not ready for it to get going. I just want to mix this together. The interesting thing about jambalaya is that it brings all these different foods together that you wouldn't even imagine bringing together. Meats, chicken, and fishes, all in one pot. Now, there are very big similarities between jambalaya and other cuisines. In Spain, they actually have a dish called paella, and it's made in a very similar fashion. And it's probably also made in America, but not by too many people because it's not as well known. But jambalaya certainly is. So, we're going to open up our beef bouillon here, and I'm going to use 1 large tablespoon of beef bouillon. Okay? Actually, a heaping teaspoon, kind of like that. Okay, we're going to put that in our mix. Now, the beef bouillon just helps bring all the other flavors together. Okay, now that we got our beef bouillon in there, now I'm going to turn my pot on, and we're going to bring this up to a rapid boil because we want this to get very hot. So I'm going to kick this as high up as possible. I'm going to give that a stir to get that beef bouillon mixed a little bit in there. Okay. Oh, it smells so good. Okay. Now, since the second main ingredient is rice, you want to make sure that you use long grain rice. Long grain rice is it's a bigger rice. It's a much larger rice, and it takes a little bit longer to cook. But you want the texture in it. If you use a light orzo rice, it'll be too small, and you won't get the texture that you're looking for. So you make sure in the recipe that you use long grain rice. So we're going to open up our bag of rice here, and we're going to add to a measuring cup. Again, I'm going to get here about a cup. A little bit more. Now, that's about a cup right there, okay? We're going to add a tiny bit more once we put everything in, just to level it off. So, we're going to set our rice aside for a second, and we're going to get our mixture of seasonings into the pot. So we're going to dump all those in there, okay? And we're going to mix this first before we add our rice to the pot. I want to make sure those seasonings are mixed around in there. Now, during the boiling process, when this starts boiling, it will help distribute it evenly, but I like to make sure it's done up front. I like to be a little bit more hands-on. Okay. Now, at this point, to the trained tongue, I can tell if this sauce is going to be where I need it. So I'm going to take a quick bite. Almost there. We need a pinch more of chili. And now this is my own, because it needs to be a little bit more spicy. We're going to put a pinch more chili and just a tad bit of salt. Now, on the salt, it's salty as it is right now. I actually add a little bit more salt because of all the ingredients to pull them together a little bit more. But if you're health conscious and you don't want to use too much salt, you can skip that step. Okay? The next thing we're going to do is put a bay leaf in there, okay? And that bay leaf, during the cooking process, will add a little bit more flavor. Now, that's pretty traditional recipe for the South. And this is the way they actually would make it in New Orleans. In fact, there's two different types of jambalaya. The first type of jambalaya is the Creole style jambalaya. The second style of jambalaya is called the Cajun style jambalaya. Now, this actually mirrors the Cajun style recipe because in the Creole recipe, they omit tomatoes. In this recipe, we added tomatoes to it. If you're in the northern states, and the way northern people of the United States make it, they would omit the tomato too. Because they want that more Creole, that more French influence Creoleness into it. So the northern recipes can vary all across the country. this is my own little touch. So I like the tomatoes. I'm a tomato person, so I make sure I add the tomatoes to it. Okay, next thing we're going to do is, now that we've got all that in there, we're going to bring that to a boil. And once this boils and it starts boiling, we're going to add our rice, and then we're going to cover it, and we're going to simmer it. And we're going to simmer it very slowly for about 25 or 30 minutes. After about 25 or 30 minutes, we're going to add our last ingredient, shrimp. Now, why do we not put the shrimp now? Well, we don't put the shrimp in right now because we don't want to overcook the shrimp, and we certainly don't want to cook it too fast. Okay? So, we're going to put a lid on here. Okay? And we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we are going to add our rice, and once it starts simmering, and then we're going to get to our next recipe, because the next recipe that we're going to get onto today is going to be a complement to this, and it's American macaroni salad. So when we come back, we'll get to that. See you in a few minutes. Okay, we're back, and our jambalaya is boiling away here, as you can see. And now that we've got a nice boil going on, we're going to add our rice, okay? So at this point, we're going to take our cup of rice and get it in there. Now, this is where we check to see, and this is all about consistency. We check to see if our rice immediately comes to the top. This all depends upon the size of pot that you're using, and it also depends upon how much water you have inside. And as I can see that the rice is actually coming to the top pretty good, but I actually want to add a little bit more. So we're going to add a tiny bit more rice to it. Okay, so we're going to add about a half a cup more. Okay, that's there. And we're going to stir this in. Now, the rice itself is, because it's starchy, it's going to help thicken up the pot really fast. And what we want to do is, now that we've added the rice, we want to let it come to a little bit of a boil, not too much. And when it comes to a boil, we're going to turn it down and simmer it, okay? So, and that actually working on gas is wonderful because it's starting to boil already. So we're going to turn this down to a very low simmer, the lowest we can get it for our pot, okay? And we are going to put our lid back on it there. And now we're going to let this cook for about, say, 15 to 30 minutes. It will depend upon how we'll look at it a few times in between to see how thick it gets. And let's say roughly 25 minutes overall. So, in the meantime, we're going to go to our next recipe. And this is going to be our complement to our jambalaya today. We're going to have a warm meal, a hot dish, and typically once this is completed, you would serve it warm. This is not a dish you serve cold. It's only served at a very hot, warm temperature. And to go with that, to complement it, we're going to make a cold dish. And that cold dish is going to be American macaroni salad. An American macaroni salad is made up of pasta, which it's a little hard to find in Albania. We actually have lots of different pastas available here, but it's really hard to find the correct pasta. The pasta that you need to use for it is elbow macaroni. But you can use any kind of pasta you want as long as it's small. And today we're going to use the regate pasta, and it actually works really good too, because the ingredients that we're going to use, the shells themselves are going to soak up the ingredients. So the first thing we're going to do is get another pot going here. Okay, and we're going to get some water in our pot, and we're going to bring that water up to a boil. Okay. Now, you want to just use enough of water that's going to cover for your pasta. Myself, I'm going to use about 1.5 liters of water. Okay? We'll get our pot on here. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now we're going to let that come up to a fast boil. Now in this instance, I'm actually going to add a little bit of salt to my water because this type of pasta, I don't want it to stick together, and it's going to pull out some of those starches too. Now, the first ingredient we're going to use is celery. And as you can see here, we have some fresh celery. Now, celery is becoming pretty popular in Albania. And I can go to just about any store now and find celery. And what you want to do is look for the stalks that are very firm. You don't want stalks that are too limpy. When they're fresh, they're nice and firm and they're crispy, okay? And I'm going to cut off one here, and you can actually see that there's a nice white and green outer edge. When you see that, you know that it's a nice fresh stalk of celery. Now what we're going to do is that in our macaroni salad, I'm going to use 3 stalks, okay? And we want to start by taking off, actually, you don't have to cut it yet. We can just kind of break off our pieces that we don't want. Now, we don't use the leaves typically. We usually break off the leaves, but the leaves themselves are very wonderful flavor. And if you want to use the leaves, you certainly can. But I like to break off the leaves, okay? And that's another way to tell if it's very fresh, because if your leaves are very crunchy on your celery, then, or very fresh, you can tell that it's very fresh. Now, fun thing about celery in the United States, when I first came to Albania, about 7 years ago, no one knew what celery was because I couldn't find it here. As of the last couple of years, you can find it everywhere. And in the United States, we use celery for a lot of things. We use celery for main dishes. We use celery for snacks. An American favorite of celery is to take a celery stalk and put some peanut butter or cream cheese down it and eat it as a snack, just like that. And eat it just like that, and it's really good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut up my celery here into some small pieces. Now I'm going to get this started. We want these pieces to be fairly small. And in this particular macaroni salad that we're going to make today, we're going to have a couple of different things in it, and I don't want one vegetable overpowering the other vegetable. You don't want too much of one or the other. If you want to kind of make it even. So what we're going to do here is finish cutting up our celery. Now we try very hard to use all the celery we can. We don't want to waste too much of it. And when I get down to a certain point on my stalk, you'll notice that some of the pieces are bigger and some are larger. Well, on the smaller end of the stalk, that actually gets down to the size of the celery that we want inside the recipe. And I'll show you that here in just a second. So, you'll notice that on one end of the stalk, we have a very large piece, and on the other end of the stalk, we have a very small piece. The small piece is about the size of celery that we want in our dish. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sit here and I'm just going to chop this celery up. Okay? And we're going to make sure that they all are about all the same size pieces. Now, if you find that you love celery, and actually I love celery a lot, you can leave it large. But again, it comes down to texture and how much you enjoy the vegetable. So now we have our celery there. Okay, we have our celery all done. I'm going to get a bowl because I'm going to get this in our bowl here, and we're going to set it aside for a moment. Now, the typical macaroni salad typically has carrots and celery, and some people like to put tomatoes, which I love to put tomatoes in it. One other thing I like to add to it is a fresh green pepper. And you want to find the darkest green pepper that you can find, because the dark peppers are very flavorful. Now you can use a red pepper too. I just prefer green myself. So we're going to take our pepper here, slice it up, okay? And we're just going to take and devein our pepper. Keep the pieces that we want. Now, lots of people, I'm an amateur cook. I do not do this professionally. I do not cook in a restaurant. I am a home cook. I'm a person who loves to cook. And I really love the opportunity to come here on the Tring Network and share some of my American recipes with you. And you may notice that I may not be as graceful with a knife or other things, but you don't have to be a cook. That's the wonderful thing about being a cook. So, I'm going to try and pretend to be a wonderful cook right now. The easy way to devein a pepper is you want to hold the pepper, cut it so that you can cut it flat, and you literally place your knife flat to it, and you can push your knife across it and easily devein the pepper in one little swoop. Take the seeds and everything out of it at once. Now that's the extent of my professionalism. Okay, maybe I'm joking a little bit, but it's kind of fun to talk about. So we're going to take our pepper. Now, considering the size, okay, the size of our celery there, we're going to make our pepper pieces, we're going to chop them up in a very similar size, okay? We don't want one vegetable or the other to be overpower the macaroni salad. So we're going to cut some strips here. Okay, and I'm going to try and do them all at once. Very important to have a sharp knife, because if you don't have a sharp knife, this can be cumbersome. So we're going to take our peppers, set them there. Now, myself, again, I love celery, but I also love peppers a whole lot. So I always like to make sure there's plenty of celery and peppers in my macaroni salad. Okay, we're going to discard them. So now I have all my peppers here. Now we're going to chop them up into some really tiny pieces, okay? And that is looking pretty good. It's about the right size that I want. Okay. Now we have our peppers done. We're going to put these into a dish, set these aside. And we're going to take a peek over to our water to see if our water is boiling. And our water is just about getting there, coming up to the nice hot temperature that we need it to be. So the next thing that we're going to add to our macaroni salad is a tomato. Now, like I said before, this is, some people like it, some people don't. I personally love having an extra little flavor in my macaroni salad. So I'm going to get my tomato here. And again, we are going to cut our tomato, okay, into some small pieces. And this is one of the parts that I like, because standing next to a tomato dish that has lots of tomatoes in it and having a fresh tomato in front of me, you can just smell the wonderful tomato flavor. So here we have our tomato, and I'm not going to chop these up too small, because you really do need to have your tomatoes where you can taste it flavorful enough in your mouth. So, okay, having a little bit of time with my knife here today. Okay, we're just about done there with our tomatoes. Now, one of the things you might want to do when you slice and dice a tomato, you have all of this liquid here. The way to drain all that liquid off of there, okay, is to put it into a bowl Now, most of the time you have a strainer over the bowl. I find that it doesn't really matter because I hand-pick the tomatoes out myself. So you take your tomatoes, put them in your bowl there. You see all this juice that's left here on the counter, which I'm going to slop up a little bit there, okay? Now that we've cleaned off our counter there, we're going to add a tiny bit of salt. All you need is just a pinch of salt. And what that will do is that salt sitting on top of the tomatoes will help pull out all those juices, the tomato juice, and let it rest to the bottom. So, what we have prepared. Right now we have our celery, we have our green peppers, and we have our tomatoes, and they're all set aside. The next thing we're going to do is take a handful of parsley, okay? Just a little bit. We don't want too much. And we're going to kind of take our parsley here. And because parsley is going to be one of our ingredients, and we're going to break up some of our parsley, okay? And we just want the leafy parts. A little bit of the stems is all right. It's not going to hurt anything. If you really want to have a beautiful, beautiful dish, you can sit in here and pick every single leaf off. Probably not as important, but because I chop it up anyway. And that's what I'm going to tell you to do. Just chop it. Just take it and chop it. It grew in the earth. We grew in the earth. We eat it all. So I'm going to take some of my parsley here and chop it down. Okay. And we're going to set that aside in a bowl. And we're going to take a peek at our jambalaya to see how it's looking. Now, when you're cooking jambalaya, always try to use a glass top so you can see through it. Because at this point of the dish, all of the juices are coming up from the bottom and all the evaporation is starting inside the dish. So you don't want to take the top off because you're going to release all the pressure. It's kind of like working with a pressure cooker. So what I'm going to do is I can see through here that my mixture is thickening up, and I can see that I'm getting a nice hard little boil even from the low heat at the bottom. And probably in about 5 minutes, we're going to add our last ingredient, and that's going to be the shrimp, okay? So now our water's boiling for our macaroni salad, and we are going to get our macaroni into our boiling water. And I'm just ripping it off and just have some fun, you know? That's what you're supposed to do, right? Okay, now we're going to take our pasta and put in here. Okay. Now it's kind of important, the timing, when you're cooking in a kitchen, because you don't want, if you're going to be serving a dish that is hot, okay, onto the table, and it's supposed to be served hot, you want to make sure that all of your other dishes that are going to be served with that dish are served at the same time. So you kind of want to watch and be aware of the timing. If you have a main dish that's going to take 35 minutes to cook, you want to make sure that you have your other dishes, your macaroni salad, your potato salad, your mashed potatoes, whatever you're going to serve with it. You want to make sure that you serve it at the right time. Now, if you're serving two cold dishes, doesn't matter. You're going to put them in the refrigerator, pull them out, slop them down in front of everybody to dig into. In this case, this is going to be served hot, and we want to kind of time it so that our jambalaya and our macaroni salad are going to be made ready and available at the same time. So the preparation time for jambalaya is about 20 minutes prep, and that 20-minute prep includes preparing your seasonings that you're going to put inside, cutting your chicken, preparing your meats, browning your meats, and after you mix everything in, you get everything into the pot, it's about a 20 to 25 minute cooking time. Now, if you really want this type of jambalaya is meant to be a little bit moisty. So that's why it's about 25, 30 minutes, maybe 20, depending on how hot you're cooking it. But if you want a really deep, hard, dry jambalaya, which some people like, you would cook it a little bit longer, evaporate all the juices out of the mixture. Okay, now that we've got our pasta shells working up here, it's going to take about another couple of minutes to get those going. And we're going to talk about the rest of our ingredients is going to go into our macaroni salad. So the ingredients is going to be for our macaroni salad. We're going to be using green peppers, tomatoes, and celery. Now, you can see from our bowls here that this is about 1 cup of peppers, 1 cup of tomatoes, 1 cup of celery, okay? The next thing we're going to add, once our pasta's done, is we're going to add mayonnaise to it. We're going to be using sauce colse, which is sour cream, okay? We're going to be adding a little tiny bit of salt and pepper to it. And then the other ingredient that we don't want to miss, because it's going to bind it all together, is going to be a little bit of vinegar, okay? And this vinegar here, also bought at Conad, is a sweet vinegar, and you don't want to get a bitter vinegar. You definitely want a sweet vinegar. Sweet vinegar is going to add to the flavor, because we're also going to be adding a pinch of sugar. So, I think we need a couple more minutes here on our pasta. We'll take a break, and when we come back, we're going to mix all this together and show you what it looks like. And we're also going to add our shrimp to our jambalaya. See you in a moment. Hello, and we're back. Our pasta is almost ready. Our pasta is boiling away there. We need about another 30 seconds or minute on it. And now we're going to take our first look at our jambalaya. We're going to open the pot here. Okay? Now, as you can see, our jambalaya here is starting to condense down, and it's starting to thicken up, and the rice helps make that happen. And the last two things we're going to do here for our jambalaya is that we're going to take our fresh shrimp. Now, you can buy frozen shrimp, doesn't matter, any kind of shrimp will do, but we bought fresh shrimp today. We deveined it and cleaned it up. And I'm going to take this shrimp, and I'm going to lay it in my pasta here. And we're going to give it one good turn. Now, the bottom of this pot is going to be a thick, really thick mixture. So we need to make sure we get all the way to the bottom of the pot. Okay? Bring it up, because the rice itself might stick to the bottom of the pot. And we want to get our shrimp in there and give it one good turn. Okay? Oh, look at that. Now, my friends back at home, my Spanish and Hispanic friends, would tell me, oh boy, look at all that great pegao. Well, pegao is that dark mixture at the bottom of the pot that turns the rice black. And in the Spanish culture, that is a wonderful thing. So, we're gonna let this sit here. We're not going to turn it off, and we're going to let it condense down for about another right now it only needs about 2 minutes because of the amount of water we use. So we're going to let it sit there and cook for about another 2 minutes. And we are going to check our pasta noodles here. I think they're just about ready. Yeah, they look good. Okay, so our noodles are prepared here. It's a little hot, so we're going to grab something to grab it with. We're going to take this over to our sink, pour these noodles out. Okay. Now, as with all pasta, you need one little more. Get all the noodles. We don't want to waste any of them, huh? So as with pasta, you definitely, before you start mixing foods with it, you want to cool it off. Very important to cool it off. So I'm going to take some water here and pour over my pasta, okay? Just to bring the temperature down fast. Okay? And we're going to let it sit there. Now a little bit of water, it's not going to hurt at this point. But I like to shake it. Now these are very, very big noodles in the sense that they have big pockets in them. So what you want to do is make sure you jump those noodles around. Make sure the water comes out. Okay, we're good. Now we're going to go over here. Now we have all of our ingredients ready to make our macaroni salad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find one bowl here. I think this bowl will do the trick. And we're going to put our pasta in here, okay? And we're going to mix everything together. So, first thing we're going to do is we're going to add our celery. Okay? Get all that in there. Don't waste any of that. I love that. The next thing we're going to do is add our peppers, our green peppers. Okay? And now, you remember we put salt on top of the tomatoes, okay? And that's helping pull all the juices out, and you can see that the juices are collecting there in the bottom of the bowl. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my straining spoon here, and I'm going to go over to the counter, over to the sink here, just so I don't get any on the counter. And I'm going to pour this out and let those juices come out. And they're all going to fall to the bottom. Oop, we lost one there. We're all right. All that juice out. Now, if you missed it the first time, you can go and do it one more time. Get all those juices out, and it's all going to pour to the bottom. Now, you can do this in advance. You can use a strainer and just have a strainer over the bowl and then let it sit there for a few minutes. This is fine because it's getting the majority of the juices out. You don't have to worry about all of them. Okay, now we're going to add our tomatoes. Okay. Now the fun part begins. The binding agent for our macaroni salad is going to be about 1 cup of mayonnaise, and I'm actually going to use a spoon here. Now, I kind of pre-measured what was inside my jar before we started the show, and I knew that there was a cup already in the jar, so I'm just taking what's in the jar out. Okay. Next thing we're going to add, okay, let's set this here. Next thing we're going to add is our sauce cosi, which in America is called sour cream. And we're going to use 1 large tablespoon of sauce cosi. Okay. Now, at this point, we want to start to mix it together. And you want to make sure that it's distributed nicely and evenly all throughout the macaroni salad, okay? Which means that it should have a very glazy look on it when it's done, okay? Now, if you made a little bit more pasta than what was needed, you might want to use, add a little bit more mayonnaise or a little bit more sauce cosi to it. But that looks pretty good right now. Okay. Okay. Now that we've got our macaroni salad blended, now it's time to add the spices. So, I actually like to mix the spices after I put in the sauce cosi and the mayonnaise because I like the spices to be sitting on top. So, first spice, we're going to use about a teaspoon. I'm going to pinch it in with my hands. We're going to use about a teaspoon of whole cumin. Okay? The next thing we're going to add is about a teaspoon. Now this is a teaspoon here. About a teaspoon of thyme. Okay? And this one, it's a powder, the mustard powder, the one that's kind of hard to find in Albania. We're actually going to use about a half a teaspoon of mustard powder. Okay? I might use a little bit more because I actually like mustard powder. And the last thing you want to add is, now you don't want to add, you're going to add the parsley now. You don't want to add the parsley to the very end because you don't want the parsley to get too mushy. You want it to kind of stay green and look pretty in your, if you're going to be presenting this for a dinner where you're going to have people, you want it to look pretty. So you want to add this right at the very end. Okay, now mixing it, you want to be very careful because you don't want to take your seasonings and get them too far down into the mix. And you want to kind of like leave them right on top of the mix because it's the fresh seasonings and the dried seasonings that you're going to taste first with the vegetables. So you get all that flavor in one spoonful, in one bite. Now, the last thing is you obviously in every dish you're going to use a little bit of salt. I put the salt also at the very end, okay? Just a pinch or so. And I'm going to use a little bit of black pepper. Okay. Now that we have that, we're going to make one more stir. Get it all binded up there. And that just absolutely looks gorgeous. And it's very colorful. Even though this is an everyday food, it looks great on a holiday table because it's very colorful. Okay. And that's it. That's our macaroni salad. Now, I also believe that our jambalaya is absolutely ready, and it smells wonderful. We're going to turn our stove off here. Okay, there's our jambalaya. Absolutely perfectly cooked. We're going to get this out front, and we're going to get some of this onto a plate. Looky here. Look at that. Look at how wonderful. Now, again, jambalaya is served hot. You do not want to serve this cold. It's not a cold dish. But you're going to serve it with a cold dish to make it a little bit more fun. Actually, you know what? After all that cooking, I'm dying for some of my Aqua Giulia water here. Really love this water. Some of the best water I've ever had. Okay, let's get a dish. Let's set some of this out. Now, what you want to do is that when you serve your jambalaya, you want to make sure that your guests are going to get a little bit of everything in your dish. So, you make sure that your dish has, and when you serve it into your plate, you make sure that you have your shrimp, you make sure you have your chicken, and you make sure that you have your sausage, okay? And to make this just a little bit prettier, we're going to take a few sprigs of parsley to throw on top. Your guests will enjoy it, I absolutely guarantee you. There is our jambalaya, and we'll get another dish for our macaroni salad. Oh, there we go. Look at that. Okay. Wonderful. So we have our macaroni salad with our side dish, a hot dish, and our macaroni salad as a cold dish. So we have our jambalaya and our macaroni salad. Now, just as a recap, our jambalaya, 3 things. You need rice, you need a meat, and you need a vegetable. Typically, you want to use chicken. Okay, this is typical Louisiana style with sausage. And also, to kick it up, you got to make sure you get that shrimp in there. So that's what you do to make your jambalaya. Now, spices, we use bay leaves, cumin, we use thyme, mustard powder, which if you can find will be wonderful. And for our macaroni salad, we use macaroni noodles, okay? And we use peppers, green peppers, we use tomatoes, and we also use some celery, which is the key ingredient to every macaroni salad. And we added a little bit of cumin also, and we added a little bit of thyme and mustard, same seasonings for both. And we also mix it together with a little bit of sauce cosi and sour cream. That's our show for today. And I'd like to thank the Tring Network for having me here because I'm enjoying this so much, bringing American flavors to Albania. And I hope you get into the kitchen too. I hope you try these recipes. Go to the store and pick up some chicken sausage and some shrimp. And I'm sure you got rice in the house, and get to cooking. So we'll see you next time on International Cooking. I'm your host, Roy Davis. Bye-bye.